Wide receiver may be the most difficult position to try and figure out in fantasy football right now, and that's saying a lot since the tight end position has been an utter wasteland for several years. But I feel like we know more about tight ends at this point in time than we do wide receivers. We've got guys coming back from injury, we've got guys that are now injured, we've got underperforming studs. Across the board here in the fantasy playoffs, every decision you make is crucial. That's why today's video may be the most important fantasy football video that you've watched all season long. Thursday Night Football, the LA Rams, the Seattle Seahawks, and we've got a ton of great wide receivers in this matchup, but unfortunately, we're probably going to be missing at least one of them. I would be shocked if Davante Adams were to play on Thursday Night Football. The Rams have locked up a playoff spot, and yes, they would love to have that number one seed, but at this point in time, does it really make a whole lot of sense to try and push Davante Adams, who's been dealing with a hamstring injury for a while now, especially against the Seattle defense that's allowing the fourth fewest fantasy points per game? Puka Nacua is going to end up having a ton of targets this week, but even Puka seems to be a little bit banged up. He was coming on and off the field quite a bit last week, and hopefully he's 100% healthy, but if he's not, it could also limit him this week as well. The Rams gave up really big games to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, and they now are allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Jackson Smith-Njigba obviously is going to be a start no matter what. He is going to be close to breaking the record for most receiving yards in a season. He's going to have a little bit of work to get there, but it could end up being very close. I would expect a big game out of him here. And then for Rashid Shaheed, I'm going to go ahead and list Rashid Shaheed as a fringe play this week. If you're looking for a dart throw with high upside, it could end up being him. If you saw Jameson Williams, he took the top off of this Rams defense last week for a huge touchdown reception. Rashid Shaheed could end up finding himself in the same place. It is risky, and we don't love taking a lot of risks on Thursday Night Football, but for those of you in deeper leagues that need a shot in the dark somewhere, Shaheed could be that guy. We get a couple of games on Saturday this week. The first one at 5 p.m. will be Philadelphia at Washington, and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are both going to be starts for me. Going up against this Washington secondary, there's obviously going to be a lot of opportunity for fantasy points here. My only major concern is that Philadelphia gets out to a pretty hefty lead and they don't have to throw the ball a ton, exactly like last week. And if that were to happen, then obviously it's going to really limit the upside of A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So let's keep our fingers crossed that they get a ton of points in the first half. So then if they do take their foot off the pedal in the second half because Washington just isn't keeping up, they've made their fantasy points and we feel a whole lot better about it. I'm not going to list either of these guys as a fringe start, but I do think there is some risk involved still. Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel are both going to be fringe starts. Obviously, this matchup isn't the best in the world. Philadelphia is allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And Marcus Mariota, he's had some good throws this season. We've seen some decent things from him at times, but he's not been extremely consistent giving the ball to either Deebo Samuel or Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin, he needs one play, one big play, a touchdown, and he's made his fantasy day. But in this matchup, that play could be hard to come by. And for Deebo Samuel, it could be even harder for him to find his fantasy ceiling because unfortunately, Cliff Kingsbury just hasn't really got him involved the way that I would have liked to see. Green Bay at Chicago will be the nightcap on Saturday, and we've got some major injuries in this one that we're going to keep an eye on. I would be willing to bet that both Christian Watson and Rome Odunze both end up missing this game. It sounds like Odunze is more likely to be week to week, while Christian Watson, as of this recording, has not practiced as of yet. That right there leads me to believe that on a short week, Christian Watson may not be ready to go, or if he does play, he's going to be extremely limited. Now, this could end up being a solid matchup against Chicago. They allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, so somebody is going to get looks from Jordan Love this week. If Christian Watson is ruled out, Jayden Reed becomes a start for me, while Romeo Doubs is a fringe start. These would be the two guys that I believe would get the most looks right off the bat. I know Matthew Golden led the team in receiving last week, but this week, Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed would be the two guys for me. If Christian Watson ends up playing, I believe I'm going to list him as a sit. We've got more information to come out though, so make sure you tune in to the ranking shows and the live show later in the week to find out exactly how limited he may be. But Christian Watson, for me, if he does play, would probably be a sit this week. Jayden Reed, if Christian Watson plays, would probably also be a fringe start just because we could see a lot of targets to a lot of different guys. So if both Luther Burden, who also hasn't practiced yet, and Rome Odunze miss this week, that means that we have to start DJ Moore, right? Right? I would think so, but I don't know if I would feel great about it. Over the last 4 games, he's got 2 games with 2 touchdowns each, but he's also disappeared in another 2 games as well. There's really no rhyme or reason to this offense, and DJ Moore seems to show up big a couple of different times or not show up at all a majority of the season. So for me right now, because no Luther Burden, no Rome Odunze, DJ Moore would end up being a star. I don't think he is. I'm not going to risk it for like looking at top 12 upside, but he could have more than enough targets to be at least a floor of top 24. Moving on to Sunday, Buffalo and Cleveland will be the first matchup that we talk about, and nobody is going to be in my lineup from the Buffalo Bills. This wide receiver core may be one of the most underperforming, inconsistent wide receiver cores in all of football, relative to the fact that they have one of the best quarterbacks and one of the better offenses in all of football. Last week, Josh Allen threw 3 touchdowns. None of them went to any of these wide receivers. Khalil Shakir, he had 65 receiving yards, but he's up and down. He might have 1 touchdown, but only have 12 receiving yards. He might have 60 receiving yards. He might disappear another week. Keon Coleman has done basically nothing all season long outside of a couple of different games. Right now, for me, this wide receiver core is a strict no from me. I don't care what the matchup looks like, even though this one is not great. Cleveland, again, allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game. Or even if it's a great matchup, I'm staying away from Buffalo. Inconsistencies from the Cleveland wide receivers are also going to lead me to just stay away from them as well. Shedeur Sanders did not look great last week, and because of that, coupled with the fact that no one has really had a solid floor all season long, yeah, Cleveland might have to throw it to stay in this matchup, but here in week 16, you're either in the semifinals or you're playing for a 2-week fantasy championship. Whatever you're doing, these aren't the players that I want to try and lead me to victory. The Chargers, they've got a great matchup this week going up against Dallas. Ladd McConkey is going to be a start for me regardless of who ends up playing. And by who ends up playing, I mean Quentin Johnston, who missed last week. If he doesn't end up playing this week, that solidifies Ladd McConkey as a guy that has top 15 upside. I know last week was a little bit of a letdown, but this matchup against Dallas, who is still allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, is a great opportunity for him to go off. No Quentin Johnston would also mean Keenan Allen is a fringe start for me. I'm not willing to put him in green at this point in time because I don't think he has that type of upside, but he definitely would be on the field a little bit more often. If Quentin Johnston were to play this week, he becomes a fringe start. Keenan Allen drops to being a sit. For the Dallas Cowboys, this is a really tough decision this week. I think for CeeDee Lamb owners, you're going to play him no matter what, because even in tougher matchups, CeeDee Lamb seems to still show up. But George Pickens disappearing each of the last couple of weeks is not what fantasy owners wanted to see in the fantasy football playoffs. And now he gets a matchup against the Chargers, who are currently allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game. However, I really feel like with Dallas still having an outside shot at the playoffs, you could end up seeing George Pickens really get forced a few targets early in this game to get him going. It wouldn't shock me if they make him a part of the focal point at the very beginning of the game, get him going, get the confidence back up between him and Dak, and then the ball starts to spread around a little bit more after that. There are some concerns about what he has done recently, though, and with this being a tougher matchup, I'm going to list him as a fringe start because there might be some wide receivers out there that you will feel a little bit more comfortable with. However, if you are shooting for upside, George Pickens is a guy that still has to be in your lineup. Kansas City's got a great matchup against Tennessee this week, who's currently allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. But without Patrick Mahomes, I can't list Rashee Rice as a straight start. Now, he's going to start over a majority of the other options that you have. I'm not going to sit him for waiver wire guys or players who really haven't produced all season long. I will go down with my best players, and Rashee Rice has earned that right to be inside some of our best players this season. And Minshew Mania has been a thing. We have seen him be more than capable of playing the quarterback position at the NFL level. But with that being said, it still is a lot of risk this week. We don't know what this offense is going to look like without Patrick Mahomes. They might run the ball 15 times each with Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. And if they do that, it is going to limit the upside greatly of these wide receivers. If you're taking a shot at one of them, Rashee Rice is the only one. For all the Tennessee wide receivers, they are heavily touchdown dependent. There is not enough volume or big plays in this offense to consider starting any of these guys. If you're starting them, you are keeping your fingers crossed for a touchdown. But it is really hard to try and figure out who on a weekly basis may end up getting those touchdowns. Cincinnati at Miami, and part of me feels like Joe Burrow is going to be looking for a huge bounce back day. Miami may be allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, but it's Ja'Marr Chase. Even in the best matchups, we're starting Ja'Marr Chase. Now, the biggest question in this matchup that a lot of you are probably here trying to figure out is T. Higgins. And for me, T. Higgins is a guy that he's questionable right now. He is still in the concussion protocol as of this recording. If he ends up playing, he will be a fringe start for me because he is going to be very touchdown dependent. And of course, being inside the concussion protocol a couple of different times over the last few weeks always raises a concern about how often he would be on the field. So T. Higgins, if he plays, he is a fringe start. He is very touchdown dependent. He could still see a decent amount of volume, but without that touchdown, he probably has a really low ceiling. Ja'Marr Chase is a start no matter what. If T. Higgins is out, I'm staying away from any other wide receivers in this game. As I was finishing up this video and getting ready to edit, I get breaking news from Adam Schefter. The Dolphins are going to bench Tua for the rest of the season to see what they have in Quinn Ewers instead. Because of that, Jalen Waddle becomes extremely risky for me this week. It was already a tough matchup. Cincinnati is allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game. I wouldn't say it's tough in the sense that Cincinnati is just going to stop everybody, but tough in the sense that really it is the tight ends and the running backs that do the most damage to Cincinnati. So because of that, the wide receivers just don't see a ton of huge games. And you have to wonder if that could have ended up happening with Jalen Waddle this week. But now that we have Quinn Ewers, he's going to have to be a fringe start. I wouldn't feel great about playing him this week, but I'll also tell you this. I wouldn't be picking somebody up off the waiver wire unless I felt really good about them to play over Jalen Waddle. For a majority of you, he's probably going to make his way into your lineup anyway, especially if you only play 2 wide receivers and maybe 1 or 2 flex. However, if you play 3 wide receivers, that's where things could be a little bit different. Keep an eye on what happens throughout the week, maybe any updates on how Quinn Ewers is looking, how they might end up playing this game, whatever it may be. Jalen Waddle definitely drops to a fringe start for me. I don't want to do it. I do not want to list Adonai Mitchell as a fringe start, but right now the stats are telling us that we should at least be considering him. Now, the matchup for New York against New Orleans is not great. New Orleans is now allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Adonai Mitchell, though, he's been the guy over the last couple of weeks in this offense. Over the last 3 weeks, he has 27 targets combined, and he has 2 touchdowns in 2 of those 3 games. So when you take a look at Adonai Mitchell, 2 touchdowns in 3 games, almost 10 targets per game, there's some opportunity there. But Adonai Mitchell, for me, is a bottom of the barrel, risky play in your deepest leagues. If you're in a 12-team league, a 10-team league, an 8-team league, and you're out there trying to figure out who you're going to play at the wide receiver position, you probably have better options on your waiver wire. But if you're in anything above 12 teams, there's definitely going to be less of an opportunity to grab somebody on the waiver wire that could help you out. Adonai Mitchell could be a risky start this week if you are really hurting. Chris Olave continues to be super impressive this season. A top 10 week last week. This is a guy that has a floor of a wide receiver 24 with a ceiling of top 10. He's getting more than enough volume. He's the main target in this offense, and Tyler Shuck continues to look his way. Now, over the last couple of weeks prior to last week, the targets did dip a little bit, and that was not great to see. But he has still been inside the top 24 in all but 1 of his last 5 games. game. So Chris Olave is still giving us a really solid floor, and for those of you that need a solid floor in your lineup to help offset any type of risky upside, Chris Olave is definitely a solid bet. The New York Giants are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game, and this should be one of those matchups that we are just licking our chops at for Justin Jefferson. But unfortunately, him and JJ McCarthy just are not on the same page. JJ continues to give Justin Jefferson the most targets of anybody on this team, but they just aren't connecting for whatever reason. But McCarthy has played way better over the last couple of games than he has so far this season. And that could end up transitioning to this game as well. The Giants defense is not good. They are inside the top 4 most fantasy points per game allowed for quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. So if there was ever going to be a matchup where you thought that Justin Jefferson was going to go off, this would be one of those matchups. But you can't put him as a start because he hasn't been consistent. And the same thing has to go for Jordan Addison. If you're playing either of these guys, you are risking it for the upside. Wan'Dale Robinson ideally is a guy that I do not want to play this week. Going up against Minnesota, who's allowing the fewest fantasy points per game, throwing out a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who has had his up and downs this season, it is really hard for me to jump on board with him this week. Personally, I'm going to probably stay away from him. If you're in a league that can start 3 wide receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson as a wide receiver 3 is really the only bet that I would be looking at. Or if you're in a league that has double flex spots, then maybe I would consider him for my second flex spot as well. But if you have guys that have more potential, better matchups, higher upside, I would probably be picking all of them over Wan'Dale Robinson. Reports last week were that Mike Evans was going to be limited, he was going to be on a snap count, and Tampa Bay was going to work him back slowly. I wonder where we've heard that before. Maybe with Bucky Irving, who scored 15 fantasy points in his first game back. Maybe we heard that with Chris Godwin, who was back to a full workload within a week of returning from his injury. It's not the first time this season that we've heard a report from the Buccaneers that they're going to limit their players when they return from injury, only for them, like Mike Evans, to come back and get 12 freaking targets. I wouldn't trust anything Tampa Bay says anymore at this point in time. Mike Evans is going to be a start for me in this matchup going up against Carolina. When you take a look at the other wide receivers, Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin, personally, we're only going to play them in a situation where we don't have a lot of better options, or if you're considering guys off of the waiver wire. If you have guys on your bench that have given you decent fantasy performances this year, then Egbuka and Godwin may end up going to the back seat for those guys. But the one thing I do know is I'm going to roll with Mike Evans this week because we know that him and Baker Mayfield definitely will connect. I think fantasy owners had a false sense of security when it came to Ted McMillan because of a 3-game stretch right before their bye week. Over the course of those 3 games, he had 4 touchdowns. He was the wide receiver 1, 2 touchdowns and 130 yards, but then he was the wide receiver 27 and wide receiver 23. Those games were also with touchdowns. And I think fantasy owners saw the touchdowns and just thought to themselves, hey, Ted McMillan breakout is coming. This is a guy that's still but it's not. It's not coming right this second. It's been very inconsistent for a majority of the year. I think when you take a look at Ted McMillan's season, I think for the whole picture of things, you'll probably end up liking it because more than likely, he's at 851 receiving yards right now. 1,000 yards in his rookie season is definitely within the realm of possibility. He's at 6 touchdowns right now, so he could end up getting to 8. But when you take a look at how inconsistent he has been throughout the year, I don't think he's nearly as safe as what a lot of people feel like he is. Jacksonville at Denver, and just when Jacksonville was heating up, they're going to get a really tough matchup this week. Denver is allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Patrick Surtain, he's on the field, he's healthy. More than likely, if I had to guess, will be on Brian Thomas Jr. this week. But because of what we saw from Trevor Lawrence last week, Jacoby Myers and Brian Thomas Jr. are both going to be fringe starts for me in this game. Brian Thomas Jr. is very risky, and I'm talking like his floor is outside the top 40 wide receivers receivers. But if he could find a big play or two, or if they can scheme him away from Patrick Surtain a little bit more often, I do think there's a possibility for him to find a big play. And then for Jakobi Meyers, he's much safer than Brian Thomas Jr. I still think even in this matchup, he has a floor as a top 24 wide receiver, because I do think he's going to be away from Patrick Surtain more times than not, which could make things a little bit easier on him. And if that ends up happening and he can get inside the top 24, a lot of fantasy owners are going to feel great about that in a really tough matchup. Courtland Sutton and Troy Franklin are both going to be fringe starts for me. Pat Bryant, he's banged up. Marvin Mims hasn't really made that big of an impact in terms of his wide receiver play this season. Sutton and Franklin are both going to be fringe plays in a matchup where if Jacksonville can keep up and they can score some touchdowns, then Bo Nix is going to have to throw the ball. And this offense looked very good last week against a good Green Bay defense. So because of that, Sutton and Franklin are going to have a lot of risk as usual, but both of them definitely could be inside the top 24. And I think one of them, even though I couldn't really tell you who at this point, has top 12 potential in this matchup as well. For Atlanta and Arizona, we have a couple of huge question marks this week, and both of those questions revolve around the health of Drake London and Marvin Harrison Jr. Both of those guys could be huge changes in the swing of momentum for fantasy football matchups. And that's why this game is going to be my underdog must-watch matchup of the week for the wide receiver position. As of right now, we do not know whether or not Drake London and Marvin Harrison Jr. will be able to go in this matchup, but there are some huge fantasy implications for both of them. When it comes to Drake London, Raheem Morris made it known that he is hoping that Drake London can make it back this week. But London is going to have to practice, and we have not seen that as of this recording. So as soon as Drake London can get back to practice, can look fully healthy and be out there, he will automatically become a start for me. Is it risky? Possibly, but I'm going to fire him up. I've been waiting for him to come back. And this is a guy that absolutely has shown us all season long that he is the #1 target in this offense when he is healthy. So make sure you stay tuned to the rest of the week to find out whether or not Drake London is going to end up playing. And if he does, where exactly we would have him ranked. And Atlanta is now allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. If Marvin Harrison Jr. can go this week, that would be great for everyone that's been waiting on him. But for those of you that have been riding Michael Wilson, that could end up being a disaster. That's another reason why we have to watch this matchup. Tough matchup last week for Michael Wilson. He was still able to come through with a touchdown and give us a solid fantasy day. If Marvin Harrison Jr. plays this week, personally, I'm probably going to list him as a fringe start and also change Michael Wilson to a fringe start as well. The last time Marvin Harrison Jr. came back, Michael Wilson basically disappeared while Harrison was on the field. And then as soon as Marvin Harrison Jr. got hurt again, Michael Wilson was right back at it as the #1 wide receiver. But he's played way too good for me to just completely dispel any notion that he could be fantasy viable. The best case scenario here, and for you that owns Marvin Harrison Jr. and you're sitting out there listening right now, close your ears, you're not going to want to hear this. Best case scenario for fantasy owners, Marvin Harrison Jr. misses this week. Michael Wilson is a top 15 wide receiver. And for those of you that feel like your fantasy season just didn't go the way that you would have hoped, you have an opportunity at a little bit of redemption, and you can do that by joining us over on Underdog. We have been laying out pick'ems in our Discord and in videos all season long, but there's also going to be best ball tournaments and everything else that you can think of for the rest of the season and even the NFL playoffs. And if you need a little bit of redemption and you need to feel way better about the way 2025 went, then end it on a strong note. Head on over to Underdog, get signed up using code HEADLINERS when creating a new account, and make a deposit of at least $10. When you do those things, you're going to get a super special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit, and you can pair that along with some of the other pick'ems that we talk about throughout the week, maybe even for some of the players in this matchup right here. But also, when you play your first $5 contest, you're going to get $75 in bonus contests as well. Right now is a great time to get signed up over on Underdog. Finish 2025 strong, and even if you had a great fantasy season, then hey, you're on a hot streak. Keep it going. Pittsburgh at Detroit. This could be a pretty high offensive game. It really depends on what Detroit defense shows up and if Detroit's offense can function way better than they did in the second half of last week. DK Metcalf, we already knew he was a grown man, but that touchdown reception last week, if you weren't laughing at the Miami Dolphins, then I don't know what's wrong with you, because it was hilarious. DK Metcalf is going to be a star in a matchup against a Detroit secondary that is, again, one of the most banged up defenses and team overall in all of football. Calvin Austin, he disappeared last week. I do think he potentially could be a fringe start this week. Maybe you take a shot at him in deeper leagues, but because we haven't really seen things consistently from him, I would rather risk it with DK Metcalf instead. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, both of these guys are going to be starts. Pittsburgh's allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown continues to be very steady. He's had some up and down performances here in the back half of the season, but his ceiling is still extremely high, and we know him and Jared Goff are going to be on the same page a majority of the time. Jameson Williams continues to just ball out. Over the last several weeks, he's been the wide receiver 14, 3, 6, a dud at 134, 4, 15, and 3. At this point, Jameson Williams has shown us way more over the last several weeks in terms of his consistency than what we've seen over the course of his career. And because of that, Jameson Williams, he has to be a start in such a good matchup. Detroit also has to win. Las Vegas at Houston. And I'll say this about this Las Vegas matchup. I don't feel good about any players from the Las Vegas Raiders. That especially goes for these wide receivers. Houston has a much better chance. Las Vegas is allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Nico Collins, for me, he's going to definitely be a start. He is a guy that could absolutely end up going off. Jaden Higgins, I think, has some flex or wide receiver 3 availability this week. Nico Collins has 75 or more receiving yards in 6 of his last 7 games. Jaden Higgins only had 1 target last week, which we don't love to see, but he had at least 5 targets in each of the last 5 games prior to that. If we can get him 5 targets again, there's a chance that he even finds the end zone this week. For the New England wide receivers this week going up against Baltimore on Sunday Night Football, good luck. Throw a dart. That's really going to be your best case scenario. The guy that's getting the most targets that seems like he'd be the best bet is Matt Collins. But even though he's getting the most targets on a regular basis, he's not turning it into much. He's only been a top 24 wide receiver twice this season. Kayshon Boutte, he has a ton of upside, but he also disappears completely at times. He's got touchdown potential, but then other times he just doesn't do anything. Stefon Diggs is the best mixture of floor and upside. He's always kind of right in the middle, and it is a really wide gap. So unfortunately, you don't know exactly what you're going to get from Stefon Diggs on a weekly basis, but going up against Baltimore this week, I would probably say Diggs and Hollins are your safest bet, while Boutte probably has the most upside, but is by far the riskiest. Zay Flowers is still a fringe start for me. I know that he had a really solid day last week, but Baltimore only threw the ball 12 times against Cincinnati. That's absolutely insane. Against New England, they're probably going to have to throw it a little bit more often, and hopefully Zay Flowers sees some more potential this week with more volume. But I want more volume. I want more yards. The touchdowns, they can come and go. That is fine. But what I want to see from Zay Flowers is where he's consistently getting close to or not more than double-digit targets and right around 80 or more receiving yards. That's what I want more of when it comes to Zay Flowers. Monday Night Football, it definitely looks like Ricky Pearsall is going to miss time once again. He's not officially out at this point, but I highly doubt that he plays again this season, honestly. Jauan Jennings is going to be a must-start player for me this week. Right now, this matchup against Indianapolis, it's a solid matchup. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game, and Jennings is coming off of a 2-touchdown performance. Him and George Kittle are the guys in the passing game. Yes, CMC is still going to get looks. I get that. But Brock Purdy does a way better job of spreading the ball around, and it's only 3 guys that you have to really worry about. In the red zone, Kittle and Jennings definitely have a ton of upside, and I like Jennings' opportunities this week, not just for volume, but for that touchdown as well. For Indianapolis, I'm going to go ahead and stay away from Alec Pierce. He was playing so well with Daniel Jones, but Phillip Rivers, to me, just doesn't have the arm to consistently find him down the field, and that's really going to kill any fantasy value that he has for the rest of the season. So the guys he's going to be looking towards more often, Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. Downs scored a touchdown last week. It was really the only reason he was fantasy viable. Michael Pittman did not have a great week, but hopefully with another week under his belt and a game, Phillip Rivers might be a little bit more comfortable, can get the ball to these guys maybe a little bit more often, and each of these guys can have a decent floor. I think Michael Pittman has the better floor. I think Josh Downs could end up being a touchdown dependent play again, but because of that may have more upside. Headliner Nation, every single matchup for the wide receiver position this week, and hopefully you got a lot of good information so you can start making some decisions on your fantasy lineups. Maybe you need to go to the waiver wire. Maybe you need to pick up a player that is going to have to be a risky play for you this week, and this video helped you pinpoint a guy that you should be targeting. But whatever it may be, please do me a favor. On the way out, interact with the video in any way you possibly can. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, bell notifications, comment down below, hype the video. Whatever you're willing and able to do, we would greatly appreciate it. But Headliner Nation, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.